Anthony Richardson will be a tough player to project for Heath. We already talked about Deshaun Watson. We got 9 more players to discuss here, starting with Anthony Richardson. Yeah, I could see, Heath, how that would be tough to project. Why don't you actually, maybe we should start with his projection.
Okay, so I've got him at, and I'm right now projecting 17 games for Anthony Richardson, but that is maybe the most difficult part is not knowing if he or Gardner Minshew is going to start week 1. I'm assuming Richardson starts week 1. I've got him at 490 pass attempts, 3,200 yards passing, 18 passing touchdowns, 17 interceptions, 1,000 rushing yards, and 12 rushing touchdowns.
Wow.
And
I want to know how you got to 1,000 rushing yards.
Because his head coach, it's 1,027 actually. His head coach has been the offensive coordinator for Jalen Hurts the past 2 years when Hurts has averaged 10 rush attempts per game. Anthony Richardson is a better runner than Jalen Hurts and a worse passer than Jalen Hurts. And they just chose to draft Anthony Richardson with a top 5 pick. I'm presuming that he will run at least as much as Hurts did for Philadelphia.
Boy, 1,000 yards rushing. It'd be so hard to not be a top 12 quarterback.
I just can't. Like he just ran an offense and went to the Super Bowl with a quarterback who ran it 10 times per game, and then drafted top 5 a guy who's more of an athlete and less of a passer than that quarterback.
So I actually was more interested in the 3,200 passing yards because Justin Fields last year, he didn't play. He played 15 games, but he was on pace for 2,541 passing yards. It was Justin Fields had a terrible year as a passer. But 3,200, did you feel like that was generous for Richardson?
Well, I think that's one of the difficult things is we don't know how bad he is as a passer, partially because I think there's reasons to think that the things in Florida, there were things in Florida that were not helping him, like the hands on some of his wide receivers and the offensive philosophy as a whole. So I'm projecting him for 6.6 yards per pass attempt, which is the lowest mark for any quarterback that I'm projecting. So I think Fields definitely had worse weapons. How many pass attempts was Fields on pace for?
Only 360.
So I've got him at 120 more pass attempts than that.
That'll work.
And so that would be the difference in the yards.
Okay. Well, is that too many pass attempts?
I don't think I don't know, maybe.
All right.
I've got it pretty similar to what Philadelphia did with Jalen Hurts is my run pass rate for them because it's a similar style quarterback and the same guy who was running the offense.
Are you guys taking Richardson or Deshaun Watson?
I'm taking Richardson. I love the upside for this reason. If we're getting 30 total touchdowns, 1,000 rushing yards, and over 3,000 passing yards, I feel a little bit like you're projecting him closer to his upside than necessary, but that's probably it's got to be a top 10 quarterback in your projections on a per game basis.
He comes in at number 10.
Okay. So he's right in there. He's got a great schedule, 6th easiest projected strength of schedule. Opens the year with Jacksonville, Houston, Baltimore, the Rams after that. But it almost doesn't really matter because this is what the Colts figure to be best at offensively is running the ball. And so expect a ton of RPOs, expect a lot of short throws, high percentage passes, the occasional deep shot. I would take issue with Richardson being a worse passer, I think you said, than Hurts. I think you said he was a better runner and a worse passer. I think he's got a stronger arm. And as far as accuracy goes, they're probably on par. Maybe Hurts was actually more accurate in college.
You're talking about coming out of college, not
coming out of college. I think
not what Hurts was last year.
His completion rate was better than Richardson's, if I recall, by a lot. But I still thought that there were issues with Hurts passing when he was coming out of college. Now Hurts is an amazing passer. You've got to hope that Richardson makes that jump here, even though he couldn't do it in any of the last 7 years before he went into the NFL draft. You're counting on the rushing yards. You're drafting him for upside. You don't have to take him with an early pick to do it. And you can get a second quarterback later on in case Richardson busts or he gets benched or starts the season on the bench and it's Gardner Minshew under center for Indianapolis to begin the year. He's one of those guys, one of those few top 12 quarterbacks that you need another quarterback with.
I remember there were a lot of the film guys, especially, that had some real doubts about Jalen Hurts' ability as a passer, but I don't think it's fair to say that coming out, like, maybe they do profile the same from a scouting perspective. Jalen Hurts, his final year in college, threw for 3,800 yards and 32 touchdowns. He had a year at Alabama where he threw for 17 touchdowns and 1 interception. Like, he was very
and a higher
successful.
completion rate too. Okay.
Very successful passing the ball. Averaged over 10 yards per attempt his last 2 years passing. Like, he was really, really successful. If maybe not as good as he should have been in terms of form, but Richardson's done nothing compared to what Hurts did as a passer in college.
All right, next player is Rhamondre Stevenson. So why is this difficult to project? I actually love, one of my favorite stats is the one you gave about the yards per catch and all the running backs who have been as bad as him. So I'm sure that factors in.
Yes, it's so much of his fantasy success last year was based on high volume. And he's a Bill Belichick running back who we entered the year and we didn't even think he was the best running back on his own team. He was being drafted in round 9, 2 or 3 rounds behind Damian Harris. So I think it's really like, did he just become a star, even though the efficiency numbers don't really look like it? Or did they just have very little creativity on offense and run a whole bunch of screenplays to him, and now they're going to throw the ball downfield more, and a lot of his value is going to be lost? Or is Bill Belichick going to go back to a 2-back system again? Because that's what he actually wants to do.
You think he's difficult to project, Dave? Rhamondre Stevenson?
I think he's probably easier than some other players that we'll talk about, because you'll just make the assumption that he'll be the feature back for New England. I have a hard time believing that he's going to be in like a 3-way even split with Pierre Strong and Ty Montgomery. That's really hard to believe. I think Belichick's philosophy at running back is use what you got. And that can change from week to week. It can change from season to season. He seems to really like Rhamondre Stevenson. He spoke glowingly about him. And you know that Belichick in press conference settings, usually when he talks about a player, it's as vague as possible. He hasn't been that way with Rhamondre Stevenson. And so I wouldn't be surprised if he loses work. There's no question that that'll happen, unless Belichick just develops the confidence in him that he can be a 3-down workhorse. And he did some of that last year, and he was successful in it. So it really is going to come down to, what does he prove in training camp? What does he prove in the early part of the season to earn more work in that New England offense? The thing that worries me about him, 2 things. Number one, projected strength of schedule is very tough. 7th hardest. His first 4 games, listen to this, his first 4 games of 2023 are against, I had it open now, I was at Philadelphia in week 1, Miami in week 2, the Jets in week 3, Dallas in week 4, and then the Saints on top of that in week 5. That's a tough schedule, I think, for him to begin the season. Does get a little bit easier after that. In division last year, you know how many touchdowns Stevenson had?
1.
The same as Ian Rappaport and future NFL quarterback Hall of Famer. I'm trying to think of a reporter. Stephen Holder, 0. He had none against the AFC East last year. He had 1 game with over 100 total yards. Receptions were what helped him in PPR leagues. So tough division. No guarantee that he's going to be the main guy. He's got to earn it, like I said. And tough schedule overall for Stevenson.
So, Adam, I've got that list that you referenced, and then I'll give my Stevenson projection. But there, he is the 8th running back since 1992 to see 80-plus targets in a season and average less than 5 yards per target. The first 7, Tiki Barber in 2003 saw 19 fewer targets the next year. Michael Pittman in 2003 saw 56 fewer targets the next year. Reggie Bush in 2007 saw 25 fewer targets the next year. Darren Sproles in 2015 saw 12 fewer. Carlos Hyde in 2017 saw 72 fewer. Tariq Cohen in 2019 got hurt. Most recently, Najee Harris in 2021 saw 41 fewer targets the next season.
Right, and he doesn't, to me, he's more like Carlos Hyde and Najee Harris than he is Darren Sproles and Reggie Bush. I mean, those guys may have had bad years, but I feel like they were legitimately good pass-catching running backs. I don't know what Rhamondre Stevenson is. I've said this a lot. It shocks me that Rhamondre Stevenson had a 69 catch season. I don't think anyone ever would have thought that. And he was coming out of college as a guy who was just a big LeGarrette Blount comparison, right? When he went to the Patriots, people made that comparison. He ran a 4.62 40. He's huge. And I just don't think anyone thought he was a 70 catch guy. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, it is interesting that some guys that I thought of as very good pass catching running backs, Heath, were on that list. Sproles, Bush, and who's the first one you said?
Tiki
Barber. So that was interesting. Maybe you can just have a bad year, but
you can just have a bad year. I think a lot of those guys that you thought of really good pass catching backs were at the end of their careers or towards the end of their careers and still getting a bunch of targets because they had always done that.
Gotcha.
But seeing their role shrink the next year because they weren't as good at it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. Here's just, I want to bring something up here that I think is interesting. So I have to use two different sources of average draft position here. But if you look at NFC ADP, and I stopped instead of doing June 1st, I did June 15th. I've been doing June 1st. But June 15th, we got 60 drafts. And Rhamondre Stevenson is RB10. And it's McCaffrey, Eckler, Bijan, Taylor, Barkley, Chubb, Pollard, Jacobs, Henry, and then you could say Pollard's pretty uncertain, but that group's pretty proven. And then it's Stevenson, Najee Harris, Breece Hall, Travis Etienne, etc. So Stevenson kind of starts a tier of uncertainty. I don't know if people feel that way. I feel that way, but obviously, Heath, you have him on your toughest to project list, so there's some uncertainty there. But that's RB10. Last year, looking at Fantasy Football Calculator ADP, RB10 was Aaron Jones. RB11 was Saquon Barkley. RB12 was Nick Chubb. I don't know what it is about the running back. It's just like a bad year for running backs or like a perceived weak year for running backs.
I have concerns, and I've said this before. The guys, almost exclusively, the guys who have been 20 touches per game or 300 touches per year are 27, 28, 29 years old. There's really only a couple of young guys who have done that or we think will do that. I think there just aren't going to be as many there's not going to be as many great running backs. Like there's not going to be 12 guys who we think are going to be workhorse running backs or Alvin Kamara.
Stevenson might be though.
Right. That's what that for me, that's why he's hard to project.
Yeah. And Kamara was in that group. Kamara, Dalvin Cook, they were in that group last year. They're not there. Joe Mixon right now is not there. Maybe he should be, but he isn't. Would you like Stevenson better than Mixon at this point?
Yes, for now.
I'm trying to decide. Definitely not if we get to training camp and nothing's changed in Cincinnati. Maybe today still, but every day we get closer and Cincinnati doesn't do anything, Joe Mixon moves up just a little bit higher.
Are you getting to the point where you're going to feel good about taking Mixon in round 2? Or are you already there?
No, I don't think so. But
that's what it would kind of take for me to take him over Rhamondre.
Right.
I have Rhamondre as like the second to last running back that I'd be okay taking in round 2 in full PPR.
Would you rather have Mark Andrews or Rhamondre Stevenson?
I believe I have Stevenson higher as of now.
Man, I might, but just hearing that question, I think I've got Andrews at 28th overall and Stevenson at 31st. Yeah.
Okay. All right. J.K. Dobbins is next on the tough to project list. What do you got for Dobbins?
I think, and you could throw Mark Andrews into this as well. Rashad Bateman was actually on the list. The Ravens are very difficult to project because they've had a change in offensive coordinator. They had a very unique game plan. I mean, it was more unique when they started doing it than it is now because more teams are doing it. With a quarterback being such a central focus of their run game, they always shared touches between the two running backs who were alongside Jackson pretty evenly, whether it was Ingram and somebody or Dobbins and Gus. They got away with that a little bit when they had all the running back injuries that one year. And then is there any role for him in the passing game at all? Does this team turn into a team that throws the ball now 30 times per game? We get 510 pass attempts this year. Does do the lack of rush attempts kind of out of Lamar Jackson's pocket, or do they come out of the running back's pocket? Does Dobbins still have to share the same amount that he always has? And is the offense as elite at producing 5-yard per carry rushers when it's not the same system?
So what do you have him projected at?
I have J.K. Dobbins. I'm too low, but you guys can tell me where I'm too low. I have him at basically 200 carries, 1,000 yards, 7 touchdowns on the ground, 22 catches, 140 yards, and 1 touchdown through the air.
Dave, where's he too low?
I think he's too low on the rushing yards. I think that he's proven to be outstanding in terms of efficiency through 23 career games, 5.9 yards per carry, 43% success rate. In 2022, he was first in explosive play rate, avoided a tackle on almost 20% of his runs. He averaged 6.5 yards per carry against 8 men in the box. I think that he's going to be obviously the guy that runs the ball the most amongst the running backs in Baltimore, provided that he stays healthy. His last 4 games, I think he gave you a glimpse of what you're going to get. About 11.8 PPR points per game, 11.5 non-PPR points per game. Favorable schedule on top of it. I'm worried about him being one of these 1,500 total yard, 15 touchdown smashbacks. He's going to fall short of that, and he'll probably be somewhere in between what I think he'll be, which is close to about 1,300 rushing yards, and what Heath has, which is about 1,000 rushing yards. And just a big part of this offense and someone to help take pressure off of Lamar Jackson.
And I do have him at 5.5 yards per carry. That's the highest that I project anybody.
That's actually lower than what he had last year.
Right. Well, right. But it's just how many rush attempts is he going to have per game?
I was thinking 15, and then I thought maybe 14, which would still be something like 235 rush attempts at 234, I think, somewhere around there. But
and I have him basically at 12.
Yeah, I thought 200 was low. That was the number that popped out to me as a little bit low. Is the 200 rushes yeah, go ahead.
It's tough because there are certainly reasons both years, but I mean, he's now had maybe 30% of his career games he's had more than 12 carries.
Right.
Well, he needs to be paid more. That's what
we'll
he
see if he
right?
does.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't know. That's why it's so hard to project, because I think if he's at 15 carries per game, 14 carries per game, then Dave's right. 1,300 yards is absolutely in the cards. I think he's really talented. That's one of the things I wanted to say too. Is like, even on the guys that I'm low on, what makes someone hard to project is when you think they have a lot of upside and a low floor.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So he's going in between Joe Mixon and Alexander Madison. You guys like Dobbins better than those guys?
No.
I've got Dobbins behind them.
Okay.
PPR is a big factor for that.